Well, welcome everyone to Building the Premier Accounting Firm. This is a podcast dedicated to helping individuals have the successful accounting, bookkeeping, or tax business that they've always wanted. I'm Roger Knecht, president of Universal Accounting Center. I've been working with accounting professionals now for more than 20 years, helping people actually get the jobs they've always wanted, but more importantly, actually start and build successful accounting, bookkeeping, and tax businesses, essentially giving them the tools, training, coaching, and support to be in business for themselves and not by themselves with the trainings that we offer here at Universal Accounting Center. One of the things that we pride ourselves on here at Universal Accounting Center is giving individuals the confidence and competence to go out and actually offer the quality accounting services that they would like to ultimately get paid what they're worth. We do invite you to listen to this podcast as well as our other episodes and suggest that you subscribe to this so that you can get the latest updates as they become available. Now, with regards to today, I'm excited to have Andy North. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Hey, welcome. Thank you, Roger. Absolute pleasure to be here.
This is going to be a lot of fun. Andy happens to actually be with Accounting Web. He's spent the last 19 years studying the world of accounting firms, as well as having run Accounting Web in the United Kingdom over in the UK. He's come to the United States, living in Boston now. He's been there since 2015 with his family, and he actually has been taking or making the most of it with his travels, going to a variety of conferences, which I have the pleasure of seeing him at. One of the things that I think is quite nice is he spends his time working to make sure that the various vendors within the accounting sector realize and articulate their value propositions to their potential customers. So that's an amiable goal. Now, one of the things I'd like everyone to understand about Accounting Web is that it is a digital publication designed exclusively for the owners and managers of small and medium-sized accounting firms, whether they be CPAs, bookkeepers, or enrolled agents here in the United States and Canada. Their mission is actually to bring inspiration and confidence to the transitional firm. So I think that's an admirable goal. That's something that we're going to have to dive into a little bit. So with all that said, Andy, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, a little bit about me. It's I'm fairly two-dimensional, to be honest, Roger. I started with Accounting Web, nearly approaching 20 years ago now, and so my role is I run the business, and I'm involved in a lot of the commercial side of it, but I also get involved in some of the writing as well. So I spend a lot of time talking to both accounting firms and the vendors that are working to supply it. So it gives me kind of a unique view of how the accounting market is changing, because the way that it's adopting technology and the way that it's the different pressures have impacted on firms play very much to how the vendors want to provide. So I'm kind of an interface between the two, if you put it in that way.
I like that perspective. So, but let me ask how you got involved with the accounting profession. What drew you to accounting in the first place?
I needed a job. That was probably the primary
That's good
driver.
motivation.
Yeah. So I'm not an accountant. I've never been an accountant. I've probably got the very wrong brain to be an accountant. But I got involved with Accounting Web. They were a local firm to me where I was living back in the UK in Bristol. And this was at the time when a digital publication was we were told that it would never work. Right? Launching a publication without a print title was a folly and destined to fail. So we kind of ignored those people, and it worked. And we were one of the first purely digital publications to launch, certainly in the professional space and absolutely in the accounting space. And
Well, as much as a folly as it was, you're here today, nearly 20 years later, and I must say that you have a lot of great content. So, with regards to starting in the UK, what then caused you to want to come to the United States?
Well, I've been running the show for for about 9 years. Out of that, I was the publisher of Accounting Web UK, and I had many times thought I should move on, I should try something else, but I kind of fell in love with the accounting profession. I really find it a fascinating world in which, I mean, when I started with Accounting Web, the cloud wasn't a thing. 70% of our readers were using dial-up to access our website. the accounting was an entirely reactive process. It was all about compliance, and it was a pretty homogenous group of people. Most firms were pretty similar to each other. What I had the privilege to watch was technology impact that, and completely changed for some the way in which the purpose of an accounting firm, the way in which they operate, and for others not really impact them at all. And you've seen this huge multi-speed evolution of accounting firms, and I found that absolutely fascinating to understand why some firms were powering ahead, adopting technology, really changing their whole business model, whilst others were really hadn't changed at all. And trying to understand why that arc occurs and why that bell curve occurs has been a bit of a life mission for me now. So when they said, "Yeah, move to America," and who wouldn't want to go and live in a different country? I find it a real privilege to come and live in any different country. But I wanted to explore the same evolution and see how that has changed, how similar that was and how different that was from the UK.
Well, here's something. We've been both doing this long enough that we've seen it change from the abacus to AI, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
what I thought was
and what a
fascinating
journey.
with what you said was you've actually witnessed in that transition many who have held to their traditional forms of accounting services. They've been slow to change. They've been very routine in the services that they've provided, while at the same time, you've seen other firms become very, very different. They've evolved significantly. And in that process, they've become, in many ways, very different from a traditional accounting firm in the services that they provide. So I'm kind of curious. Have you noticed why someone stays very firm in just the traditional accounting services versus someone who goes out and offers very revolutionary or more value-added services?
That is the kind of $1 million question, and I'm glad you asked it. I think there's a whole raft. I have a bunch of theories. I have some data to back some of my theories up, but let's go with just the gut feel. I personally, I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that people who are running firms today, more often than not, made the decision to go into accounting probably in the 90s, potentially the 80s, or in the early years of the 2000s. So when they decided to go into accounting, the world was accounting was about rules and discipline and structure and kind of rigidity. It was that was the what the role was. And I'd say my son is a rule follower. He he was trying to open a bag once, and I said to him, "Hey, do you want some scissors to open that?" And he said, "No, it says tear here," because he wanted to follow and that's a true story. And I think the those people that were going into the firms because people say to my son, "You should become an accountant. That's you've got the right mindset," and I bristle at that. Um, but if those people who went into accounting because their brains fitted around a very structured and rule-based world, that's great. Until we all changed the rules and said, actually, no, we need you to be much more entrepreneurial now. We need you to be lateral thinking and creative. And it's not a simple binary switch you can turn in your head and say that's the kind of person. And I suspect that the 10 or 15% of firms that we see now who we classify as alphas in air quotes, who have been very successful at transitioning their firms and changing their whole business model, probably shouldn't have gone into accounting. They were the 10% that would have failed had and gone off and done something else had the rules not changed. But now the rules changed in their favor, and they're suddenly in a place where they can really take advantage of the new world. So I think that's part of it.
Well, I'm
Um,
going to interrupt you there for a second
yeah.
because I have to agree. So keep your line of thought with what you're about to share. But I'd like to actually share that with many of the people, as you described, from, let's say, getting into the profession in the 80s, 90s, the early 2000s, what happened is they were drawn, I believe, to the rigidity or the absoluteness of the profession. 2 plus 2 was 4, the debit and the credit, the balance of the balance sheet. They were drawn to the fact that there was something there that they could trust and rely upon and be a part of, and providing their clients or customers this information that was black and white. There's a lot of appeal to all of that. But you're right, the profession has changed now to where there is a paradigm shift, and those people who are starting to embrace that happen to be drawn to the fact that they can be more creative, they can have different relationships with their clients, take on more of a consultative service and advisory role with their clientele. So I like where you're going with this. This is good. So please continue.
Yeah, well, I think that you've put it probably much better than I did there, and I think that kind of is one big drag. The other thing I find really fascinating is, and just to be clear and just to set some definitions, what I mean by this the practice transition, it's moving from doing bookkeeping, doing tax return, compliance, looking backwards to looking forwards and providing much more proactive advice. So just to be clear, that's what we're talking about. The firms that we see in the US tend to, as I say, there's probably about 10 or 15% of the market that have been really, really quite successful at doing this. And then there's an awful lot more firms who say, yeah, I want to change, and they haven't really been that successful in doing so. And the vendors that I work with, and these are people who create beautiful software solutions to help firms do reporting and import their data and to process their accounting, have been pushing out this message that if you don't transition your firm, you're going to die. You're going to be out of business because the robots will come and eat your dinner. And that makes some sense, but I don't know of another example of a profession or an industry that has been told to change by its suppliers and not by its customers, because I don't see the demand for advisory and proactive handholding coming from the bottom. It's not coming from the clients. Not to say that they don't benefit from it, and I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that firms shouldn't start going down this path, but it doesn't seem to be that firms are demanding it. And I think that's another reason why there has been something of an inertia in the way that firms have been developing, and certainly at that low level, they're not necessarily seeing that the demand is there. I don't know if does that fit true with your take
It
on
does.
the
And the
market?
way I would describe it is what I have found is that the clients don't know that that service exists, and they don't know that they can ask their accountant for that type of service. So it's an education
Yeah.
point for the firm to educate the client that that service is available and that that is something that can be provided. And until the firm is able to educate the customer, they didn't even know to ask because they didn't realize it was available. And so you're right. I don't know that the clients are necessarily demanding it, looking for it. As they're assessing what firm to go with, they're not evaluating which is the better coach or advisor. But I believe it's the responsibility of the firms to help educate as to why the fees are the way they are, why they charge what they do, because these are the services they're offering and these are the benefits their clients are receiving. So it's a push rather than a pull. The firm is needing to push this out to their clientele and educate them as to the services they're offering. And I'm going to describe it in a very specific way just to see if I could get your input on it. As you were talking about the evolution of the accounting role in the profession, the way I would describe it is, imagine if you went back, say 50, 100, 200 years ago, the role of the accountant was literally taking and transcribing in a journal or ledger the transactions, and what the business owner was able to see were accounting numbers, financial statements from months in the past, just because it took so long to create and transcribe all of those. And with computers, it collapsed that. And what I'm describing here is that accounting became less and less historical. It used to be that for us to give someone a financial report, it was, 3 months ago, this is what the business did. And then it quickly became, well, we can close out the financials for the previous month. Well, now with artificial intelligence, with AI, with the different computing systems out there, you're finding that accounting is no longer historical, it's real time. I can tell you right now what's going on with what's in your bank, what your margins are. I can tell you what your receivables are, what your payables are today, not what they were at month end last month. And so that period of time has collapsed to the point where I believe what you said about our being forward thinking and looking more as a profession at helping our clients see with forecasts and budgets what the projections are, what tomorrow's going to look like based on what we've seen with historical data and such. That's powerful, but it is the change in the accounting profession. And when you bring in things like blockchain and so forth, it's removing the question of the validity of the numbers for audit purposes. There's a lot going on here, but what it really boils down to is the profession is evolving such that I think we're doing less and less historical because the present is available to us.
Yes, yes, and I think also there is something of a skills problem in, doing data analysis is not something that most accountants are trained in, and it's not something you can watch a couple of YouTube videos and pick up either.
Well
Um,
said.
it's one thing, having that data in front of you, but knowing how to interpret it. What are the most? I mean, I've been presented with great reports in my time, but being able to figure out which numbers are most important, what KPIs should I be measuring, and which ones can I ignore, is a skill in its own right. And even once you've done that, okay, I can see the profitability of your business is tailing off over the next 2 years. What are we going to do about it? That's a whole nother conversation and a whole nother skill set. Um, I do somewhat criticize the technology industry for kind of rather glibly suggesting that moving to advisory is a very simple thing, and do it now, you'll be rich by next week, is grossly misleading. And we've not perhaps paid enough attention to the barriers that firms have in offering those services, and crucially offering them in a way that isn't disruptive to the rest of the firm and is profitable.
So, with your saying that, what trends do you see taking place in the small firm world? What trends should they be aware of that are going around them?
In the small firm world, I mean, there's hundreds of micro trends going on. I think one of the most interesting elements to look at, and it does underpin any kind of practice transition, is pricing
Okay.
and the structure of pricing. So, as I know you're certainly aware, the traditional model of accounting was the hourly bill. So you have an hourly rate and you multiply it by the number of hours that you did. Um, if you stick to that model, it can impede your progression and the way that you can use technology, because if you're using technology to automate a task that previously took you 5 hours a week, now takes you 20 minutes, can you still charge the same amount of money? Um, how do you've that's great. You've just lost me a whole load of business, a whole load of money doing that. Um,
Yeah, and so what's the motivation to do that if I'm charging hourly and I found a way to cut in half the time it takes? What's my motivation to cut my bill rate?
yeah,
There is none. And so when you're on an hourly bill rate, you're sabotaging your own success because you're limiting your need or desire to improve your processes because honestly you're paid for as slow as you work.
yes, absolutely, and that so the a lot of firms. I mean, we have research that still. It's some, and I'm just pulling up the actual research right in front of me because we've just been doing a big survey on this. That a significant number of firms are still billing based on time. Now, the panacea for that was to move to the value pricing model, whereby the price that you charge is directly related to the value that it brings. So if I'm going to save my client $10,000 in tax, I should charge him 10% of that. If I'm going to save him $1 million in tax, I charge him 10% of that, even though the actual work only took me the same amount of time. To be honest, I don't think I've ever met a firm that is purely doing value pricing, true value pricing, where their price is based on the actual value.
Mm-hmm.
And even people like Ron Baker, who's written extensively and really came up with the whole concept of value pricing, has sort of backed away from that. And it's largely in the UK has been kind of abandoned. And the fixed fee model seems to be much more accessible to a lot of firms. So doing that, you're obviously taking on the risk that a job will not spin out of control and actually take you more time and effort to execute. You have to be very careful with change orders, etc., in a fixed fee model. But that is seemingly the direction that we're going in. So we recently did some research. And we asked the question, do you track time in your firm? And this was about 500 firms have taken part in this. 23% said, no, we don't track any time at all. 56% said, yes, at least some of our clients are based on time. And then another 20% said they do track time, but only so that they can measure efficiency rather than to actually bill based on that. So it's still a very mixed picture. But picking your pricing for any service, whether it is the compliance work, whether it's advisory work, is crucial. And I think that challenge does hold back a lot of firms because they're not necessarily comfortable with changing. If you've got an existing client base and you're moving from one model to the other, that can be quite challenging. And just when you're trying to launch a new service, if you've not done it before, figuring out how much you should charge for it is one of the biggest things that holds firms back.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I can definitely say, as we've addressed this numerous times here at Universal Accounting Center, is to go from hourly billing all the way to value-based pricing. There's a bridge there, and it actually evolves through, like you were mentioning, fixed pricing. It talks about revenue-based pricing. There's menu pricing. There's a variety of things that a firm needs to be aware of because there's actually appropriate places for each. Hourly billing is most typically applied to project type work, such as back work. There's basically a multitude of things going on, and we don't know how long it's going to take, so I'm going to charge that hourly. But when you look at your fixed pricing for the monthly services you're providing, you can be pretty consistent with what you're going to be doing. And so it affords you that ability to kind of fixate in there and do some menu pricing that offers a variety of services for different costs. So there's a method to the madness if you just understand what the recipe is. And what I'll do is I'll actually share in our description of this podcast some information that people can go to for some pricing information that would, I think, be very telling and helpful in their figuring out what they want to charge in their own firm. So I'll provide that in the description. Excellent discussion here. Let me ask you this question. What is holding firms back from taking advantage of the technology that's available to them today? We go to these conferences, we see all these vendors, such amazing thing. The AI that's coming out is just, it's in some instances kind of jaw dropping, but what's holding firms back from taking advantage of it?
Another excellent question. And I'd be, on my yacht now if I had the definitive answer, but
I thought I heard the waves in the background.
Yeah, that's it's not so much a yacht as a dinghy at the moment, but we'll
Just so long
get
as you're
there.
not going under, we're good.
Yeah, we'll live. Again, a number of reasons. I think that it comes back to that issue of where is the demand for this coming from. If you I mean, I work with a lot of technology vendors, and some of them make the mistake that all firms want to rush to advisory services, and I'm kind of on a bit of a personal crusade to get rid of that term. I don't think it means anything. Um, it's entirely subjective. We're working on a major piece next year to understand what advisory is. I think we all fell into the trap of kind of making the case that advisory was the thing to do, and then looking at how to do it without actually questioning what it is and what it looks like. So for me, there's a spectrum between really simple advisory, and I'm coining a phrase that from Ben Richardson from Zero. The concept of really simple advisory, which could be termed as printing a report out, pointing at some numbers and smiling, right the way through to the much more operational type of advisory, where you're even going down to production lines and looking at utilization of staff and time. They're on a spectrum, and it's all clumped into this group called advisory. I think there needs to be a lot more clarity of what that means, and then only once you've determined that can you meaningfully look at what kind of technology that you need.
I think that's very good because there's a lot out there, and how do you narrow down which you then consider for your firm? The way we've done it is we've suggested that you just look at it in two silos. Which of the applications are going to be beneficial to the workflow and the services that we provide that are going to benefit the firm internally? And then which of the technologies out there are actually helpful to the clients we service, especially if we're in specific niches? Is there something that we should be bringing to our customers to help them? And in turn, oftentimes these technologies bleed through and help us do our work anyways. And so if you can just kind of look at the technologies and go, well, does it first of all help my business? Does it somehow address a process that I'm doing that it could simplify? Could it help me be more beneficial in the services I'm doing already? In other words, can it help me with what I do now? And then the second being the client services. Is there a specific client that would benefit from what they're offering and in turn help me do my job better? That has been, I think, a very effective way of evaluating the technologies. Otherwise, it is overwhelming. Could I use this? Should I use this? Well, okay, just ask the question. Does it help the client or does it help me with what I'm currently doing today? And then once you're established and really working well, efficiently with what you're already doing, then you can look at adding additional services and technologies because now this is a value add that you're bringing in that you didn't have before. So that's how we've kind of chunked it down, if you will.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. But I think you do touch on a second of the issues that's holding firms back, and that is the relationship that they have with their clients. Um, Unless you have a very open and a clear relationship, you're never going to know what services and what technology is going to help your clients because you just
Yeah.
don't ask those questions.
Yeah.
My wife had an accountant in the UK who will remain nameless, and he came round to give us a quote and to talk about the services he offered. He asked her kind of one question about what her business was, and that was it. There were no questions about who her clients were, what kind of clients she had, whether they paid on time, what her big challenges were. It was, okay, for this kind of business, I'm going to charge you X for doing um, a tax return.
It was purely transactional. I'm just going to record what your transactions are and we're going to leave it at that.
Precisely,
Yeah.
and it was, and I was in the room and crying out for this guy to go, just ask a few questions about why she started the business, what her long term goals were. None of it happened, and I think that's a common issue with accountants, that they, unless you're prepared to really open up, you've got to be honest with your client, they've got to be honest with you, and explore their business in a way that you might explore. You might chat to a friend about what their business is like. That's the kind of relationship you've got to have, and I think that's absent, certainly
Mhm.
at one end of the market.
So the way I describe that is being genuinely, sincerely interested in your
Yeah.
potential client. If you're curious about their business, their product line, why they got into business, what are some of the challenges they're facing within the business, these things are all very telling questions. And more importantly, they are things I think the accountant should know. And when the client hears these questions, they actually feel the genuineness of that accountant in wanting to do the work for them. And so I think what you just said is powerful, powerful. So I'm going to just pause here for a quick second because we do want to thank our sponsors. Obviously, we spoke at the beginning of Universal Accounting Center and Accounting Web sponsoring today's episode. Accounting Web is actually offering a step-by-step walkthrough for building an actionable cash flow worksheet. I think this is an excellent tool and resource that you should take advantage of. The information will be provided in the description of this podcast. And also, part of this episode, you'll be receiving from Universal Accounting Center a free copy of the book Red to Black. This is a specific how-to guide for accounting professionals to address clients' cash flow needs, specifically helping them actually address what's the most common problem that most businesses face today, which is cash flow, cash flow, cash flow. So with that in mind, take advantage of the information in the description of the podcast to actually get that available to you today. So, Andy, I want to just kind of break into some little personable things here. What are you passionate about personally, and what are you passionate about professionally?
Oh, good question. I say I'm quite a two-dimensional person, really. My my passions extend, way into whiskey, and because my family are very theatrical,
Uh-huh.
so my wife is an actor and a voiceover. My kids are now doing the same thing. My kids have done all sorts of voiceovers, and they're both in a play right now. So I'm not the acty type, but I'm on the periphery, and I like to help out as much as I can with that. So,
I think
but
if you drink more whiskey, you'd be more open to acting.
it could well be, and I'm not sure in a positive way whether that how that's gonna flesh out.
Okay.
Um, but I'll admit that the thing that I really enjoyed, and you mentioned earlier the conferences that we go to, it's really sad, but they're kind of the some of the highlights of my year is when we get to go to QB Connect and Scaling New Heights and Accountex and ZeroCon. Um, if your listeners are minded, they should definitely check out some of those conferences. They're so useful. There's so much content at them. And most importantly, you meet some fantastic people. I have made lifelong friends at these conferences, and I like nothing more than, we go down there, we spend 3 or 4 days all together, and that's probably one of the most exciting parts of my job, and I I thoroughly enjoy that, and I know you do too. I've seen you at many shows over the years.
I do. And actually, I have to agree with you. There's some great acquaintances that you make at these, and friends do come from the shows. One of the things that I always encourage accounting professionals to do is go to these for three big reasons. One, you said the content. I agree with you. You got to stay relevant. And if you take your profession seriously, you want to be aware of what trends are going on that you can benefit from. And so you can remain relevant for your clientele. The second thing is the conferences afford you a chance to meet peers, people that are doing exactly what you're doing, and you don't have to be threatened by them because they're in different markets and so forth. So you have a chance to really kind of probe and learn what are the best practices, what are they experiencing, and not feel as if you're alone in the work that you're actually doing. But then the next thing is, I think people miss out on attending the vendor section of the conference. That's where the cutting edge stuff is. That's where the tools are, the resources that you really need to take advantage of. So don't just go to the sessions, but take advantage of the vendor area. You're going to get some great swag, obviously, but the point is go see what's on the cutting edge. What really is out there for you to do your profession even better. And those things you just don't get sitting in your office or staying in your hometown. You've got to go to these conferences. And so I make it a point of attending numerous ones throughout the year. But I think even if you just attended one, you'd be better off than having attended none.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, I think you can go to the seminars and the sessions, etc. But when I've seen probably the most useful stuff happening at those shows is kind of over lunch when you get 9 or 10 basically strangers sitting around a table eating, and then a conversation between two people crops up. Someone across the table jumps in and goes, I have exactly the same problem, what did you do? And you genuinely see um, a light coming on in people's minds. It's great. I think it's really useful and probably essential if you're going to really make your firm zing.
Well said. Well said. So I've got two questions I want to end with to kind of wrap this up. The first question that I'm going to ask you is a very interesting one. It's, what quote or mantra do you use in your business as you're running your company?
Oh, good question. Good question. I think one of my areas I need to improve and take that as something I'm really bad at is recruiting people, and I find it very difficult to judge and to be able to establish the right people. And one mantra that I apply is that you shouldn't judge a candidate, or anyone, frankly, but you shouldn't judge a candidate by the answers that they give, but the questions that they ask.
Ah,
I
well,
always find if you've got a candidate in whatever capacity that they're coming into work for you, they're making a decision about their job and their future. And if they don't want to ask deep, profound questions about what the company's doing and what the company believes, and beyond how long are my breaks, which is the question that you always get, um, they're probably not going to be committed, and they're probably not going to have that relentless curiosity that everyone should have when they're working, and certainly in a client facing role, um, to unless they're going to ask you those questions. I want to be challenged about why we've done certain things. So judge not a man by the answers they give, but the questions they ask.
well said. I like that last summary there of it. Excellent statement. I couldn't agree with you more. So here's my next question. I'm one of gratitude. I think having a sense of abundance is very important in life rather than scarcity. So share with me something you're thankful for.
Something I'm thankful for. I am thankful for a whole lot of things. My family, the life that I have. Um, I think the one thing I'm really thankful for is the opportunity to come and live and work in the US. I'd never even been to the US before I basically moved here, and that was a huge shake up in my life. And we arrived in Boston. We came from the UK. We had 9 feet of snow within the first 2 months of us moving here. My kids had never seen anything like it, but it's still an experience that it makes my life feel like it's come alive. So there, that's I think that's something.
Well said. I like that. And I'm sure you're grateful for either a snowblower or a snow shovel, at least.
Exactly. Yes, I didn't even know what a snowblower was until, until a few years back.
Necessity is the precipitous to any creation, and seeing that is something that you need. Yes. All right. So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to recap what we've discussed, but before I do, thank again our sponsors of Universal Accounting Center and Accounting Web. We've got a few other things that are going to be made available in the podcast description. So in this episode, you'll also receive access to how much is your firm really worth. Accounting Web has provided some great information here to assist you with that. And Universal Accounting Center, along with that, will provide a value builder score, allowing you to quickly assess the value of your company based on the 8 drivers that determine the worth of your firm. The other that is available is 4 steps to an advisory business model. I think something that everyone needs to consider, especially after our discussion today, considering what advisory services are. And related to that will again be that book, Red to Black, the accountant's guide to actually help accounting firms service their clientels based on their cash flow needs, basically giving you the tools and the resources you need to help your clients better understand and manage their cash flow situation. So what I've heard so far, Andy, is basically a lot of information regarding what a firm needs to be aware of to be relevant to their clientele, to price their services correctly, and most importantly, leverage the technologies that are available to them today to actually provide quality services to their clientele. Would you think that's a fair assessment of what we've discussed?
I think we could go on for hours on this, but I think they are certainly some of the crucial points. Read Accounting Web. We're not a news outlet. We are essentially a collection of resources that are practical, aimed at anyone who is running or looking to start an accounting firm, and we pick what the biggest challenges are, and we provide practical advice, more often than not sourced from real live accountants who have faced the same challenges. So what you're going to get from Accounting Web is a completely free, I might add, set of community generated resources to help you take on the biggest challenges that you have. There's hundreds of them on the site. Please take a look and take full
Yes.
advantage.
And Andy, thank you so much for making that available. I think these people do need to check it out, and I appreciate that invitation. So with all that said, we're basically going to do a wrap. Listen to our other episodes and definitely subscribe to this podcast, Building the Premier Accounting Firm. And for more information regarding Universal Accounting Center and these principles that we've talked about today, visit us at universalaccountingschool.com or give us a phone call at 801-265-3777. And with that, have a wonderful day. And remember this, if it's about accounting, it is universal.